today changes my whole entire life.
Welcome to Gritability, a podcast about the power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I'm your podcast host, Adam Clausen, and with me in the studio is the beautiful and ever radiant Ro Clausen.
Hi, guys.
You are looking exceptionally radiant today with the light like shining off those glasses. I love this look.
Thanks. It's honestly because I didn't feel like putting on lashes because I'm flying for 6 hours in a couple hours. So I just decided to do the hide it with the blue light blockers.
Hide it. Well, now your secret's out.
I share my secrets. We're all good.
And everyone knows that you look beautiful either way.
Thank you. So tell me about this outfit.
I'll tell you about mine if you tell me about yours.
Ooh, threaten me with a good time.
So, as you can see, and I am extremely uncomfortable in this today. You know, it's funny. The first time I came in this studio to do an interview for Action Junkies, came in here as a guest with John Orlando, and I was all suited up, right? That's like my uniform. And I have spent most of the last few years in a suit, very intentionally, right? Like I talked about making sure that I present myself in a certain way. It's about first and foremost what's underneath that suit, like being confident in your own skin. We always talk about that, but I believe the external too, like your outward appearance has a big part of it. So I'm coming in here today and I'm feeling a little uncomfortable in this t-shirt, hat, but it's for a reason. This shirt has some significance. It's got a bit of character to it. It is definitely well worn, but it was the best shirt that I had when I walked out of prison.
So for you guys that are listening and not watching this on YouTube or Spotify, he's wearing a gray, older, like thin material t-shirt and that you got in prison, that you wore in prison. We've had this shirt for a while. We've been waiting to donate it because we wanted to wear it on, we wanted Adam to wear it on an episode.
And when you say donate it,
burn it. This one might have to be burned.
Just to clarify. Yes, we're not saving this one.
Okay. So tell us about the shorts.
Well, the shorts are that same stylish gray, and they are long cut. They're actually sweatpants that were cut down into shorts that one of the guys working in laundry who has access to the sewing machine, because they do all the prison uniforms, the khakis, and he stitched these on the machine. So I got the nice thick double thread. And for all of you out there that have no idea, know nothing about sewing or any of those things that you have to learn when you're in prison, like you figure it out really quickly. They sell you on the commissary. They sell these little sewing kits with 3 tiny needles.
Like the dollar store ones.
The dollar store and these little tiny spools of thread. And they're like, oh, you need to fix something? Here you go. Figure it out. And you figure it out. And there are some guys that are really, really good. They can sew. So although, I was big on doing a lot of things for myself, becoming entirely self-sufficient, I could sew. But if there was an opportunity, if I knew somebody was better at it, or if I could support someone else's hustle, like that's what guys do to make some extra money, put pockets in these, because these sweatpants come with no pockets. They're long, and I'm paying to have them cut into shorts and have pockets put in.
I'm impressed. I didn't realize that they came without pockets and those were put in. They did a great job.
And they did. And that's what I'm saying. Like, very impressive. There's a lot of talent in prison. That's just something very small. But there's also time and opportunity to hone whatever your skills are. And if you're doing the same thing repeatedly, it just demonstrates, man, how good you can get at something given that opportunity. So that's why I'm wearing the grays today, to reminisce a little bit, reflect on walking out of prison. This is what I was wearing when you picked me up. And it was the best of what I had. I left all the other clothes and stuff behind. But I was even thinking about that as I was getting dressed, like the things that I left behind, like some nicer pair of socks, like some sweatshirts, like worn sweatshirts, how much other guys valued that. And when somebody leaves you something, even if it's a piece of clothing, especially to a guy who's going home. I was a lifer, 213 years that got immediate release. And although it took a few days to actually get out, there were people who were just anticipating that, like getting a chance to watch me walk out the door because they weren't getting that same opportunity. And the things that I left to them, like I understand the significance that they had, not monetary value, but like sentimental, like for sure, almost like a talisman, right? Like this guy got out and he left me this, like I'm going to hold on to this. I know it because I had guys leave me things when they went to other places or they went home, and I did, I held on to those tightly.
Love that. So I'll just quickly say what I'm wearing because it's not really as sentimental
What?
as yours, but
I'm looking at my face on there. So I hope it's sentimental.
Doesn't every wife wear a huge cartoon version of their husband's face on their shirt? So I had this mate. Did I ever wear this to visit while you were talking?
You
when I was
did.
trying. I
You
did.
did.
I
Yep.
had, of course, backup because I didn't know if they'd let me wear it, but I got this made for something. It might have been when I was going to the White House. I don't remember what it was, but I took a picture from when Adam was inside and I got it made into kind of like a cartoon image. That's when everybody was doing merch on YouTube and that's how they were doing it. So I did that, and then it says Help Free Adam across the top, and on the back on a slant across the back, it's Adam's website. What was Adam's website when you were inside, helpfreeadam.com. So, and I'm just wearing a pair of leggings that mean nothing. I just needed bottoms. But I wanted to ask you, why today? We said we held on to that outfit.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you wearing it today? Why did we choose today?
Because we're wrapping things up. Because next week, 1 week from today, it's official. It's finally over. Supervision ends next Friday. And yes.
That's big.
Yes, it is, man. There are not too many things that I celebrate, but I am definitely going to celebrate this. And George, we were just talking about this before we went live. Like the way that we celebrate, there's going to be a steak. There's going to be some sort of dinner. Like that's how I celebrate these days.
Yeah, big fat steak somewhere out there. 2 sides. It's a 2-side type of night. No sharing, just for you, bro. Just for you.
Definitely. So I'm super excited about that. We are going to be live next week while I am in Philly, where it all started. Actually, the
Like
place,
a block or a couple blocks away from where you were arrested?
Well, I am staying at the hotel 7 blocks from where SWAT came in, pulled us out, and ultimately where, I was put in cuffs and ended up spending the next 20 plus years incarcerated after that. So, yeah, definitely a full circle moment on the day that I get, or I complete my supervision. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be back to where it started. Definitely a full circle moment. We're going to be filming that. We're going to be recording definitely for the show, for others, and hopefully get a chance to connect with some of the people who were central to that way back then.
Yeah, I'll just fill in the people. Yeah, no, we were able to get a cameraman slated up for you. I was going to tell you off air, but I might as well just tell you on air.
Yeah.
He's going to go and recreate some of those moments, get some good B-roll, and then hopefully next week when you're on we may have to move up the time next Friday because 4:30 7:30 p.m. I figure you'd probably want to be at dinner. So we'll probably push it up a little bit earlier. So 2 p.m. on the West Coast, possibly do like a 5 p.m. East Coast time.
Cool.
As
But
long as my babysitter's available, I'm good.
Yeah, bring him if CJ isn't here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just be careful what you wish for.
I know. We'll have all hands on deck for that.
Okay.
All right.
It's a big day.
Okay. So when we were deciding what we wanted to talk about for today's episode, we figured, first of all, we wanted to let you guys know that. And second of all, since we're wrapping up Adam's 3-year term of probation, we would do a live Q&A and we'd talk about all things parole and probation and answer any questions that you guys have. So make sure that you put them in the chat and George will get to them for you. We have a couple that were pre-submitted, but I want to start. I want to ask you a question.
Shoot.
So this 3-year probation wasn't your first time on parole or probation, right?
Oh, no.
So you were on probation once before, and you didn't see that one to the end, right? You were
Parole.
Parole, okay.
I was on parole previously from a state case.
So in like 2 sentences, what's the difference between parole and probation, real quick?
In most places, there really is no difference.
Okay.
They're very much interchangeable, just different departments, and it depends on what state you're in.
Okay.
So
Got it. So you were on parole. You didn't see it through to the end because you got violated. Tell us that story.
the story of how I got violated.
Yeah, I think people need to hear both sides. I think people need to hear about when you violate, and I think they need to hear on the opposite end and the success story of making it through to the end. So tell us about the time you violated.
The time that I violated. So this is a good story. You know,
Depends who you're asking.
so for anybody that's been on supervision, there's just it's hard to explain what it's like to be under that constant threat of going back, right? Like we think when a person finishes up their time, that's it. It's over. Like, hey, you're free. You get to go out into the community and hey, we're just going to keep an eye on you. But that's not historically how parole, probation, whatever your term of supervision afterwards functions. You know, most of us, especially 20 plus years ago, when I got out in 1997, you know, it was basically the parole officers at that time were just another form of law enforcement that was looking to, you know, find a way to put you back in prison. And there were more people that went back from violations, from not following the strict letter of their supervision, meaning they give you a list of restrictions and say, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And if you violate any one of those things, they technically can send you immediately back to prison. And, you know, in some areas, guys would be like, well, I had a couple different dirties. Like I you know, gave them bad urine where I tested positive for something. And guys would be like, man, I had 3 before they sent me back. Like, proud of that. That wasn't the case with me, right? So I lived under that threat, always concerned about going back. And I vividly recall every time I went down there to the parole office, right, I'd get within a couple blocks. I'm not even at the building yet. Like, I'd just get to downtown Camden, and I never went down there for any other reason. And I'm like, oh, damn, here we go. And I'd park and I'd be walking, and I remember I'm like chain smoking. I'm like, well, let me get in just in case I don't walk out this door today. You know, like I was preparing myself mentally to not walk back out the door. And that's a terrible way to live. So anyways, I'd get in, I'd go up the elevator smelling like urine. You get up there to the waiting room, the bulletproof glass.
I thought you were smelling like urine. I was like, you left this part of the story out when you told me. Jeez.
No, not me. Like the elevators, it's foul. It's nasty. You get up there and, you know, the waiting room is basically like a holding cell, pretty close. And, you know, there's bulletproof glass, a buzz, you know, door to get in and out of there. And, you know, you give them your name, you give them your ID, and they tell you, yeah, just go sit over there. They'll get with you. Your officer will be out whenever they're ready. So you don't know. You don't know how long you're going to be there. You might be there 10 minutes. You might be there, a couple hours. So you go over and you get comfortable, and you didn't have a smartphone to play with, right? Like you just had to sit there and like tough it out. And the longer you sat there, the more you had to wait, with the stench of that place, and just, you start, you're in your mind like, oh my God, like they're waiting for me. Like when I go through there, I'm not coming back out today. So, I went through this for a couple years, that I was actually out, and I was coming up. I wasn't that far from finally being done. And listen, full disclosure, like I was living dirty. I was out at this point pretty much every night of the week. Admittedly, I'm doing drugs, I'm doing cocaine, I'm doing ecstasy, I'm drinking every day. And one of the conditions of my parole, I don't think I mentioned this, is that you cannot leave the state. And it's even like that now in my supervision. Like I have to give notice to go out of state. The difference is we live, where we lived on the East Coast, like the tri-state area, you go from one state to the next just, in a couple minutes. And I lived on the edge just outside of Philadelphia where, everyone that I was dealing with at that time, doing all illegal stuff, right? Going across the bridge to Philly from South Jersey and Camden, like the parole office, the county jail, you look across the Delaware River into the city. It's literally right there. So technically, you're not allowed to cross. I'm going back and forth multiple times a day sometimes, depending on what I'm doing. So I'm dirty all the way around, full disclosure. But I'm still, when I go in there, I'm hoping that I can just skate through. I only have a couple more months and I can get off this supervision, and then I can just go do whatever the hell I want to do. Not that it was really stopping me at the time. It was just keeping this impending fear. So I'm sitting out there. I'm in the waiting room. Well, I should back up. That's what it was normally like. I'd go up there, I'd sit, I'd wait, and it was just never knowing whether or not you're going to come out. The last time that I ever went to parole, before I went, I had a feeling. You get that gut feeling, and most people that end up in prison have all had this feeling.
Wait, whoa. You had a feeling?
Yes.
What was in your pocket?
Oh, hold on, we'll get to that.
Like, just a premonition?
Hold on. No.
Or a self-fulfilled prophecy.
This is before I put that coat on. We'll get to that. I was still at home. I was at home, and I was like, man, I don't want to go in today. I have to go in. My PO has called me. He's like, listen, are you coming in? He's like, I need you here before 5. I was like, I'll be there. And I'm like, damn, I got to go. So the young woman who's with me, I asked her to take a ride. Come on, we got to take a ride. I'm going to go over to parole, and I'm only a couple towns over where I'm living at the time. So she gets in the car, we take a ride, and I'm kind of talking to her as we're going, and I'm trying not to let her see that I'm pretty nervous about this. I'm not feeling good. My intuition's going off, and him calling is not a good sign. And maybe that's why I asked her to come, right? So we take the trip, we pull up, I park out front. We go up and go through the whole routine, up the elevator, and this poor girl is like, oh my God, like, where are you taking me? And we go up, she sees the bulletproof glass. I give my ID. We go over and we sit down, and think of like a dirty bus terminal. Maybe that's a good description of what this place is like, right? So we're sitting in the corner of this dirty bus terminal that stinks of urine. And I'm like, hey, hon, can you do me a favor? I was like, if anything happens, just make sure, take my car, drive down to see Lou at the shop. I was like, leave my car there. He knows what to do. Don't worry about a thing. And she's like, I see the look of fear in her eye. Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I was like, I'm just saying, just in case I don't come back out. And I see the tears start streaming down her face. And I'm like, oh, shit. Okay. I was like, listen, It's nothing to worry about. Everything's going to be fine. But here, I put my keys in her hand, and I'm wearing like a 3/4 length, like a leather coat that's long on me. She's a tiny little thing. And I'm like, here, put this on. But before I do, I'm checking my pockets. And I reach in my pocket, and this is what you were referring to. I reach in my pocket, and I'm like, oh, shit. I was like, I am totally out of pocket right now. And I pull out what looks like a golf ball. Only, you know how a golf ball has divots in it? This is kind of the reverse because pieces have been chipped off of it. And I have a little bit bigger than a golf ball piece of cocaine in my pocket. Yes. Mom, I hope you're not listening. And I'm like, oh God, I walked into Parole with this. Shit. I'm like, okay, listen, just take this, put it on, take my money, take everything out, put it all in my jacket pockets. And I'm like, if anything happens, you just leave. If I don't come out, just go. So they come up, they call my name. They're like, Clausen. I'm like, okay, open the door. Here's my PO. I can't tell anything. I mean, the guy was he was a jerk off, period, right? He never gave me anything positive, never constructive, never, in my opinion, ever tried to help me. He was always just looking for something, for a reason to send me back, which is why I kept so distant from him, right? I felt like, anyways, it doesn't matter. So I'm following him back, and we walk into these offices. Now, picture just a huge open room, and there's walls, but they're only half walls. And there's all these small cubicles. So you can see straight across the entire room, except in the center of the room is a box, like a 6x6 box. And that's where the toilet is. That's where they do all the drug testing. Like literally in the center of a room. You step into a closet and all the POs are around you. And behind that is like the secretary bank. It's like other office administrators that work there. And so as I'm walking back, I see other guys coming in to report. They're meeting with their officers. And I look all the way to the back and I see these 3 young women, and I've seen them before. I've seen them downtown. I've bought them drinks before because I recognize them from the parole office. They came into one of the places that we used to be at all the time. And I'm like, I know these girls. And they keep looking at me. And when I realized, I'm like, oh shit, they're from Parole. I was like, listen, their tab right there, make sure they don't pay for anything. That's on me. So this is like months earlier. So whenever I'd come in, they'd kind of see me and they'd be like, hi, like real discreet. This time when I walked in, they weren't smiling. And so that knot in my gut, I'm like, oh God. But I don't really have time to process it because I only take a few more steps. We hang a left and we go from this big open room. The left side of the wall, there's a doorway, and there's about 7 offices in this hallway. And those are where all the senior officers are. And my officer happens to be a senior officer. And as soon as we turn the corner and I step through this doorway, here we are again. It's SWAT. They are on me. Bam, slam me up against the wall, hands behind my back. I'm spread, cuffed. I'm like, oh my God. And he's like, I told you not to mess with me. And I'm like, you would think like this is serious. It's going down. This was for a dirty urinalysis. I tested positive for cocaine.
Oh, I'm shocked.
I mean, I got to tell you, I wasn't entirely shocked. I mean, I had been beating it enough times, but I was just completely out of control, to be honest, right? But what I didn't need was what they gave me. There was no conversation. This guy was just pissed off. And again, he had gotten his reason, and this was it. As soon as I'm cuffed, there's like 8 guys in this hallway, got me jacked up against the wall, and they're carrying me by the cuffs down this hallway. And I've always looked down to the end of the hallway. It's a narrow corridor, and at the end You know how like closet doors, like there's no lock, there's no nothing. There's definitely not a deadbolt. And it looks like a flimsy door. And I always thought, like, what is that, a closet at the end of the hallway? And I never paid it much attention. Well, here I am going down the hallway towards this door, and suddenly someone steps forward, opens it, and we're in the parking garage.
Oh, wow.
There is a car not 10 feet away with the back door open, the engine running, people sitting up front, and they stuffed me into the back seat of this squad car to take me next door to the county jail. That was it. Camden County Jail. Do not pass go. Boom, you're gone. So as I get in, I'm telling them, like, hey, there's someone waiting for me out there. Can you please tell her she needs to leave? Tell her to go home so that she doesn't sit there. He didn't give me a response. I found out later that someone did finally go out there and tell her to leave.
I'm glad you said that, because this whole entire story, I had myself, because from my experience in her shoes, like, how long do you sit there and wait, right? And then if she went up and asked somebody, I'm sure, like, is he coming out? We can't tell you that information, you know, or who knows what they would have told her. Maybe they would have, but just the feelings that she must have felt at that point, I put myself in her shoes. So I'm glad you said that.
Oh, I can't imagine. It must have been traumatic when they did tell her.
Of course.
He's not coming out. You just need to leave.
And I'm sure they said it, delivered it.
Oh, you know
in
it.
that way.
You know it. And that's what parole was back then, right? Like parole, they were straight gangsters, especially in Camden. And at the time, that was like the murder capital of the world. So in all fairness, like, that was a tough job. I can't even imagine what it was like for those officers to go out, especially in those neighborhoods, to do some kind of checks. And I don't think people realize that when you are on parole, like the conditions that come along with that are like they have access to your home, like 24 hours a day. You have to, like, they come to the door, you let them in, period. You sign that over, and whomever you are living with, if it's a family member, if it's a girlfriend,
Your children,
like they're exposed to that, and they have to be willing to deal with that, which is why, unfortunately, you know, a lot of people, I understand completely, don't want to open up their homes in that way.
Yeah, and also, I know one of the pre-questions we got, and I'm going to insert it here now because it fits, is how do you prepare yourself for a home check? Because you know what you're signing up for when you do this, because right before or a few months before somebody is released on parole or probation to that place to live, the house has to be checked by parole or probation, and it has to be approved, and it can be denied.
Yes.
So do you know how? I mean, because
how
we didn't have...
How do you prep for it?
Yeah.
Great question. How do you prep a house? Well, there's certain requirements that they're going to tell you from the start. They're going to say, listen, do you have any firearms? If you have any firearms, like immediately you have to get those out of the house.
They might not tell you that, so take that advice as advice.
Yes, you need to know that, because anyone who has a felony conviction is barred from even having what's called constructive possession. Here we're going to get a little bit on the legal side. It's called a 922G. It's a federal firearms offense. It's for anyone who has a felony conviction. Who has a felony conviction. You cannot own yourself, even if, like, say someone dies, like a family member, and you inherit a firearm, like a hunting rifle, anything, it doesn't matter. You cannot physically own it, and you cannot have what's called constructive possession, meaning you and I mean, we live together. Even if you had a permit to carry a licensed firearm, had it registered, had it licensed, you kept it in a gun safe where only you had the combination to it. Not good enough.
Yeah, that's why I had a girlfriend who kept a gun in her trunk because she lived in a state that there would be like elk or moose or whatever in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the road. Yep. And her parents gave it to her as safety for her. And her husband was driving the car unknowing, who was a felon, unknowing that it was in there. And no, that's a lie. He did know it was in there. Sorry. And when he was pulled over, they asked him, and he's like, listen, it's my wife's car. Her gun's in the trunk. And they arrested him. And he was looking at 10 years for felon in possession.
10 years. Yep.
Yeah.
Mandatory minimum.
Yeah. And it's federal. Even if you have state charges, that becomes federal.
It's crazy.
So
I
don't want to dwell on that. Yeah. So don't have a gun. Go ahead.
Yeah, don't have a gun.
Don't have drugs, obviously.
Make sure. No, that's it's good to note that as well, especially with I'd be interested to know like where they stand on marijuana these days because it's been legalized. But
I would
depending on the state, you
the
need to have the
charges.
prescription. Like I'm saying for the other person that lives in the house, because they're going to come in your house and you're you're allowing them to go through your stuff. And I don't want to scare anybody off, but like they can literally go through your shit. They open up your drawers and go through it. That's what you're allowing.
Yeah, my advice, I went through this with my girlfriend Lauren when they came and checked her house. He was getting out of the feds, and she said she had a better experience than she expected, so she did a whole video on my channel about it. If you guys are going to go through this experiences, Lauren's great. She'll answer your questions, I'm sure, if you have them after watching that video. But basically she's like, obviously be polite, don't be an asshole to them. Her question to me beforehand, we were wondering like, could she have alcohol in the house, because she was a drinker and she didn't have a drinking problem. She just liked to drink her wine and her vodka when she wanted it, and it wasn't a problem. I think the stipulation is if it's written within the, what is it called, probation order or whatever that's called, like the rules of his probation, and he can't have that, then you can't have it in the house. But she had no problem, and she just kept her, she was obviously a clean person, but she had her house tidy and neat, and she had a conversation with this woman, and it was fine. I think the only issue she had was like scheduling to make sure she was home when they came, but it wasn't even a problem. Like that was the hardest part of it. So don't freak yourself out. Like clean your house like you would as a normal adult, and don't have illegal things in there. Find out if you can have like booze or that kind of thing. Don't have a gun, don't have drugs, and I think you'll be good.
And I really, really want to point this out because I share my experiences from my time on parole previously, right? Which was totally negative. There was nothing good. Like I told you, like I had a pit in my stomach every time that I had to go down there and report in. My experience on U.S. probation, which is what I was released on. And to clarify for people, I had a 213-year sentence that included, on top of that 213 years, I had 3 years supervision. So when they finally reduced my sentence, the judge did not change that part of the order. He left 3 years, and I'm going to say only 3 years. Often it's a much, much longer term. I was very, very fortunate to receive that. I was even more fortunate to end up with the parole officer that I have had for the majority of the time that I have been out here. She was absolutely amazing. Keep in mind, this was during COVID, so things were a little strange. Like my first home visit, we had to do it via video, go around the house. I was under, by court order, intense supervision, which meant I had to call in every single night to see whether or not we had to go the following day for drug testing at a place called Westcare, which when we got our place, we didn't know any of the geography of Las Vegas. We are on the opposite end of the city.
I still wouldn't want to live down there, even if we did know.
Absolutely not. But, and it's the place that they contract with, right? So we didn't have any choice. Like, this is where you got to go. I'd call in, and if they said, tomorrow's your day, you got to be here by whatever time, like 7 p.m. You have 7 a.m. till 7 p.m.
And it's walk-in. Like, you don't have an appointment or anything like that. You just have to make it within those hours.
You just have to make it, but it's also dependent on what time of day you get there. Everybody gets off of work. Like, it becomes a madhouse. We were super fortunate that you were driving. You were able to take me there because you're working from home. So whenever initially like this was going on, we were able to get all the way across town. I didn't have to take the bus and spend hours getting there. I didn't have to worry about it with my work schedule because when I did start working, I'm working for a nonprofit that works with system impacted persons. So they fully understand and supported me going over there to get drug tested. Like they knew the deal. But the majority of people don't have that coming out.
Yeah.
Like there are so many logistical challenges to going through that additional level of supervision. We were reminded of it repeatedly. You know, I'd be like, damn, especially when it was like twice in 1 week. I'm like, how could any person who's doing this either on their own, doesn't have transportation, like is just struggling to get by? How are you going to do this? So that was the first part. That was 6 months. As soon as I was off that, I can't tell you, like we slept easier.
Yeah.
Because there were times like at night, it was like, oh my God, did I call?
We both put alarms in our phone to make sure that we called. And there was still times that, you know, when you have an alarm in your phone every single day, after a little while, it becomes background noise. Like, oh, I'll call in 5 minutes. And then 3 hours pass. We're getting ready to go to bed. Sometimes we're in bed and it's like, oh my God, one of us remembers, oh my God, I never called. But thank God.
Thank God I had you to help remind me.
Yeah,
too.
and thank God I think you missed once and you came in and you offered to come in like that morning, the next day, whatever it was. And she was very understanding about it, but there were no other issues.
There were no issues, but also here's a note to anybody out there. If you have a loved one who's about to be on some sort of supervision, I'm a firm believer in this, right? We had to live so transparently for so long. Like we became comfortable to a degree living that way.
Yeah.
And what we post on social media reflects how we live, right? And if you're not aware, they're watching your social media as well. So if you're posting crazy stuff on social media, right? Like, what are you thinking? Make sure that if you're doing well, you're posting the positive stuff, like that you're going to work, that you're spending time with your family. Like, make sure that your social media reflects that so that when that person supervising you takes a look, they're like, oh, okay, cool. Like they get to see how well you're doing and you give them reason to step back and give you some space. Like we really went out of our way. Like I send, when we come back from a trip, oh God, I just remembered I didn't text when we got home last night.
He's home.
Speaking of which, I need to text my PO right now and let her know that we got home last night. But I'll send pictures. Like I text pictures.
I think sometimes you're annoying and in a good way.
I might be.
You're live on YouTube right now with the location Sticky Paws Studios.
Thank you.
Okay.
Boom.
Yes.
Tagged. They know where you're at.
You know where I am, and we're constantly posting and promoting the positive stuff. So I think that makes it easier.
Well, but I also think that's really good advice, right? Because when I was, I had a girl that was volunteering for Strong Prison Wives and Families, and she came out to Vegas for a vacation, and she was posting pictures. And no, I think she did a live video drinking and driving. And she mentioned what was in the cup. So it's not even like she could play it off. And I had to ask her to step down because I can't have that associated with not only my nonprofit, you being on the inside. I mean, I know that's like very a step further, but all of my members, like I can't be promoting that, you know? So that's really good advice is to just, number one, watch what you're posting on social media. And number two, maybe start posting only the positive, like go above and beyond to post the positive stuff to prove that like you're a good fit for a person who's on parole or probation. It will be healthy for them to be living in your house. That's great advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So were you done with that thought before I?
Yeah, because I want to give a shout out to.
Wait, but really quick before you do that.
Okay.
I don't want to segue.
Sure.
Because we had a question that came in last night. Sorry, George, I'm doing your job, but it's part of what you were just talking about.
Okay.
She wanted to know if there were any other, aside from having to call in, like stipulations or any kind of rules that you had during your supervision this time.
Did I have any rules?
Yeah, like let me see exactly how she
can't leave the
worded it.
state.
You can leave the state.
Could not leave the state with
Restrictions.
Could not leave the state without permission. Which, when you get to the Hoover Dam, which is not far from here, you know, we'd have family come and they want to go to the Hoover Dam. It's like, okay, I can't go across the bridge with you.
But at Hoover, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you, but at Hoover Dam, there's like these two poles and you're in Nevada and then you're in Arizona, right? And Adam's Pia was so cool that he sent her a picture of him standing in Nevada with like a foot dangling over Arizona. And remember, she laughed about it. She was so like, you weren't in Arizona, of course, but You were cool. Yeah. So you had to submit something when you travel. Go ahead. Keep going.
No, and that's exactly it. Like, I very differently from what I was talking about in my past, in my youth, like going back and forth across from Jersey to Philly. Like, I was living, my whole life was dirty, right? I was selling drugs. I'm doing everything that's like, that was the least of my worries. I live a very different life now, and I have no problem sharing all of these things because I live within the lines and I'm totally comfortable where I'm at. So I don't have those same concerns. And I'm telling you, it is so much easier to live that way. Like, I don't have the stress.
I want to throw this out there for people that are either living not as right, or for people that like are living right. And there are so many times it crossed our minds, it didn't cross our minds. Easy pass. Like, I had a friend who went over a bridge from one state to another, not even thinking about it, and his parole officer called him. And he had a cool
was tracking the
easy pass. Yeah, or like they call it Sun Pass, iPass. Like, it's the automatic toll pay thing in your car. In different states, they call it different things. But she was cool, and she's like, "You left the state," and he was like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm just going over the bridge. Like, I'll to a restaurant. I'll be back over a couple hours. All right, just check in with me when you're done." But if you have one that's not, and that's just waiting to violate people because that's what they get off on, they can track you on there.
Great point. And I've been saying this for years. Like, anybody that's out there committing crime, like, crime is dead, right? Everything is on video. All of your movements are tracked. Like, to think that you're going to get away with something, you might get away with something in the moment, but listen, man, like, there's evidence of it somewhere. People are going to catch up to you. Just like you said, that things that we don't even think about. Your phone is constantly, sending out a signal where you are. So it's nice not to have to worry about those things. And even though it's not, my supervision at this point has not been very restrictive, I can't tell you how excited I am to finally be free next week, to fully be liberated and just not even have to worry about it. Like, I can leave the state. We could hop on a plane and go someplace. Those are things that we can't do right now. I still have to file the report 2 weeks in advance or request asking to leave the state. Like, that's just the reality. Back to the restrictions real quick. Did I have any specific ones? Excuse me. Surprisingly, they did not say that, like, I couldn't drink or I couldn't. It was basically just, don't go outside of the state. Make sure that you check in.
Was that written though when you were sentenced, or did this judge write that? I'm just curious because, like, if it was when you were sentenced, they probably just made it up. Like, they didn't have to add anything to it because they never thought you were getting out.
I don't know. That's a great question. Like I said, they gave me the 3 years, which was the minimum, when they also gave me the 213 years, never thinking that it would have any bearing on my future. And fortunately, the judge did not change that portion of it. He decided to keep it the same. Although we did petition for early release.
Why didn't you get it?
The court said something about that I was doing so well. It didn't seem to be impeding my progress in any way. So I might as well just finish it out. Yeah, Sean wasn't too happy about that one. So, and that's not how it's supposed to work, right? Like, supervision is just, whether it's parole or probation. And I say this because each state functions a little differently. We've spent a lot of time recently in Arizona, and I've been very much inspired by what they're doing there. I got a chance to sit in on a parole orientation. And it was parole officers coming in to talk about how they were there to support individuals, that they would do everything they possibly could to avoid sending them back. And although, over the course of the 2 hours that I was there, seeing the community partners come in, having this whole experience helped shift the mindset of many of the people in there. Not everyone. There were a couple of individuals in the room who were like, I'm not buying it. Like, I've had my experiences and you can't tell me that these people are going to support me. Like, there was still skepticism.
I've never been on paper, and I would feel the same way based off of everything I heard.
It's hard. I mean, if things have been a certain way for so long and you've had multiple negative experiences, it's going to take, what's the ratio? Positive experiences to overcome negative. It's a pretty high percentage. It's like 10-1. Like, you need 10 positive responses to overcome every one negative. So understanding that, Parole's doing an excellent job, in my opinion, in Arizona to shift the culture there. It's going to take some time. You have some amazing individuals who are doing that work. And we've been very fortunate to connect with many of them. And what I learned is that judges have the authority to impose in Arizona sentences. I think they do 85% of their time. So you're going to do the majority of your time on the inside. You're going to get out. You're going to have very short parole, but then they can impose a term of probation on top of that. So that person then transitions into probation. If I'm understanding all this correctly, that's a lot of extra supervision. And regardless, when you're under supervision, there's some additional stress. Yes, there's accountability, but there's still some stress there too. Even when you're doing the right thing, like just to feel like, there's someone watching your every move. So building relationships is critical. And I would encourage anyone, regardless of what supervision you're on, try and build a relationship with that person. Even if you don't feel like they're totally on your side, on your team, make the effort, to build some rapport with them. And the likelihood is that it's gonna help you in the long run. And maybe you get a better understanding of where that person's coming from too.
Love it. George, you want to rapid fire some questions?
Rapid fire some questions. I have one question here that was sent also before the show. People, make sure you send in your questions. And I had mentioned on your channel earlier that we were going to probably cancel or stop the stream. But since we're so close to the end here, I'm just going to leave them both open.
Okay.
So if you're in Rose stream, you're okay.
But also join the subscribe to Gritability.
But yeah, subscribe to Gritability. Please do that. We need the watch hours right now. So the question that I had for you, Mr. Adam, this comes from a person who says, I have a cousin who is recently released from prison. He is currently in Phoenix and trying to transfer to Las Vegas, where support is at. The paperwork was supposedly, or had supposedly been done at the beginning of 2023, but they couldn't do it. My question is, how can he get transferred faster than 30 to 60 days? What is something that can help him get out of a horrible homeless shelter to Las Vegas sooner rather than later?
Oh, that's such a tough spot to be in. Coming out of the system and ending up in the homeless shelter. Unfortunately, that happens to too many people. And especially, it sounds like he has support here. The fact is, sometimes you're dealing with the bureaucracy, right? One state to another, there is paperwork that needs to be filed. I would suggest if you're that person on the outside, that loved one, keep making those phone calls, keep reaching out. For his part, he needs to do the same as much as possible. Reach out to whomever he is assigned to, because if he's still in Arizona, he's on someone's caseload. And believe me, Arizona is going to be happy to transfer someone off their caseload. Anytime they get an opportunity to lighten the caseload, they're happy to. Conversely, Nevada is probably not going to be excited to accept another person, especially from out of state. But if you can reach out, and especially if, you keep making those phone calls, if you find someone who has some influence, in those situations, we met some amazing people while we were in Arizona, working in parole and probation. There's a lot of good people there. And I am confident that there are those who would, be more than willing to help you. Especially if you said all of all of your families here in Nevada. The goal is to get people reconnected with families, get their support system around them. And I'm sure Arizona would be supportive. Hopefully we can get Nevada on board with that as well. But it's generally, that's going to be an officer to officer or office to office type situation. So definitely stay on top of them.
Excellent. And we have Cecilia McMillan in the chat as well. She just said, this comes from Matt via Maine State Prison. He asked, do you think we can end stigma around parole with more coalition groups? Have you considered this?
Good question.
Ooh, and the stigma around parole. Man, it's tough, right? We were talking about this yesterday. My position when I had the Second Chance Employment Agency, right? Excuse me. I would go in and sit down with owners or, people from HR, and I would spend time explaining to them the value of hiring someone coming out of the system, saying, hey, listen, this person is under supervision right now, which means they're going to be frequently drug tested, which means, there's a different level of accountability, which means they got to show up for work every day because they're required to be at work. Unlike most people coming into the workforce these days, young people, like the first bad day, they just tap out. They're like, I'm done. Our workforce is different. Our people are going to show up. They're fully committed. They have to be there. What I was alluding to was that supervision, right? And I was trying to spin that in a positive light to employers. But the reality is, that's a challenge. Most employers look at it like, okay, that sounds good, but do I really want someone who just got out of prison? And do I want to have that supervising officer coming into my place of business? Most of them don't. And even if they do hire you on, unless your officer is really, really good about connecting with you, like pulling up to your place of employment saying, hey, could you come out, and it depends, man. If you're in a fast-paced environment and you can't just like walk out of work, that's going to be an issue. The other thing is housing. Housing is always, especially here in Nevada, but pretty much anywhere. If you have a felony conviction, most landlords openly discriminate. They're not going to give you a housing. And you don't have any credit history because you've been in prison. So you've got a felony conviction, you've got no credit history, and a lot of times you really just don't have the money for the down payment and everything else. Like you're just scraping by, and a landlord looks at that and goes, no way, I'm not taking a chance on you. So there's a lot of stigma because the concern is, okay, if I rent you, if I give you a job and you get violated, then you disappear anyways, right? Like you're gone. I could lose you any day. And it's not even like going out and committing a new crime. You could be violated for something minor, something technical. And although things may have changed, and most parole offices will not violate for minor technical violations, the perception still exists. So although the system is slowly changing, perception is going to take much longer to accurately reflect where we are with that. So it's a lot of stigma to overcome. Yes.
I want to add something. So part of my mission at Strong Prison Lives in the beginning was to, quote, break the stigma, right? And then I realized throughout the years of doing it, it's not my job to break the stigma. And I know that sounds crazy, but in saying that I want to break the stigma, that's me trying to control somebody else's thought. And stigma, it does exist for a reason. So I'm going to give you an example from my life, and I promise I'm going to bring it back to parole and probation. But I'm sitting in a visiting room to visit Adam one afternoon, and there's a woman across the room who's hitting her small child in the face over and over and over again to prove to everybody else that she was a good mom. It was disgusting. There was another set of girls sitting across the other side of the room talking about the dudes that they were hanging out with last night, and the guys on the inside they were going to visit would never know. They lived the stigma, right? Stigma exists for a reason. So it's not our job to break that stigma. It's our job to live above that stigma. And it might sound easier said than done, and I'm, getting lost in semantics, but Adam was pushing for second chance employment by saying to these people, like, I understand that that's a possibility. Give my people a chance. And they would flip it. They will work so much harder for you because they need to prove that they're not those type of people. They need to prove that they're rehabilitated. They need that job. So just if you can think of it like that, because if you go on a mission to end the stigma or break the stigma or become an organization that ends the stigma, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure versus worrying about yourself and how you're going to live above it.
Wow. That's a mic drop. Can't drop this mic. I wish I could.
Nope. Please don't drop them. Please. Even if you could. They're expensive. But no, that's interesting. You don't want to be able to control people's minds.
And you just can't.
And you can't, but you can manipulate. And not all manipulating is bad.
Not all is bad, but the ones that are going to manipulate for the bad are living the stigma. And that's just kind of case in point.
Yeah, it's learning to flip your manipulating.
Exactly.
Yeah, it comes with all those years you had to spend reflecting. Like you better learn the opposite of what you've been doing. So we have another question here from Cecilia McMillan. She said, what would you say to a citizen concerned about people with violent histories living on parole in their community?
I would say, look at me. I'm one of them. I am a repeat violent offender. I'm that person that they always talk about, being the one who shouldn't be given a second chance because I burned those second chances. And yeah, I did. I ended up hurting a lot of people. I put a lot of people in danger. But it's also the reason I feel such a great weight of responsibility at this stage in my life to model what happens when you do give people like me a second chance. People who are well deserving, people who have made mistakes, and who, like all of us, man, want to move past. Like, none of us wants to be defined by the worst thing that we ever did, right? Like, we all want an opportunity to be redeemed, to be seen as valuable, as having something to contribute. And, part of it is age, I'll be honest. What I saw in so many individuals like myself, repeat violent offenders that ended up with crazy time in prison, they were some of the most compassionate and giving people because I'm going to say we collectively feel like we have that responsibility to give back. Like, it's part of our purpose to contribute and to break that cycle and make sure that others don't have to go through the same things that we went through. So those communities that are reluctant, like, I look forward to being out there in the community. I go to some crazy places now, political events, very affluent, areas of the community where, wearing a Brooks Brothers suit, people look at me and they do not see my past. But I always make it a point to tell them my past as a way of demonstrating, and we were talking about stigma, like, that's the way to your point, to live beyond that stigma, to model what it is to be that success. The more success stories that we have, the more examples, living examples that we have, the more we can move away from that. And the reality is the numbers bear this out. Pretty much everyone in America nowadays has someone within their circle, whether it's a relative or someone, one step removed, that has been impacted by the justice system. We've seen it in our lives. We've had people come into our lives who it has dramatically changed their view of the system and of the individuals who have cycled through the system because it shapes their perspective. Once they've been exposed to it, they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize all of these challenges were so real. I didn't realize that those life experiences, shaped that person early on. So, with that, I have looked forward to it for many years, long before I was ever released. It was always in anticipation of having this opportunity to be one of the many people out there who are living that example of what happens when you give second chances to those who seemingly are irredeemable.
I have just one more question before we get out of here, and this comes from Sarah Carter, and she said, did you guys ever have a surprise home inspection while on federal supervised release?
How do you want to answer? You want me to answer that?
I mean, we had a very different experience with federal probation, federal probation. I know people who have. If you're asking if it's possible, yes. Adam had a very good relationship with his PO, and he worked for an organization, like he said, that was working with people who were coming home from the system. Somebody who was, respected in the community at that point he had all eyes on him all the time. So it kind of wasn't really necessary. She did come and inspect our home. She hung out with us a couple times. Came to inspect and stayed and, asked questions and that kind of thing. I don't mean like hung out like as friends.
She didn't dig through the drawers.
Yeah. No, but
it was very casual.
It was very casual. And a lot of times she'd be like, hey, are you guys home? I'm going to come today, which is not very common. And that doesn't happen very often. Usually they're just going to knock on the door. So be prepared for that. But in our instance, I don't think we ever had just like a show up.
I would say expect them to show up unannounced. The fact is, I was on supervision during COVID.
Yeah, good point.
So there were certain restrictions in their protocols that limited those like coming inside of your home.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So we got through that period. And it was once COVID was lifted, the rapport that I was talking about earlier had already been built. And at that point, it was like, hey, what are you doing today? Are you going to be around this afternoon? I'm going to be in the neighborhood. I'd like to stop by and see you, have a conversation, just see how you're doing.
And we're like, come in, look at the nursery we built. Like, I mean.
Yeah, and she was almost like, okay, no, I've seen it. I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, just want to come by and, have a conversation. And I think we set the tone of that relationship. So realize that you have influence over that. And through repeated interaction, you can shape the relationship and make it a more positive experience, even if it doesn't start out that way. And George, I think that was the last question.
You touched on it, but there was one that was submitted that I want to make sure that you answer. Do you find that parole and probation is actually rehabilitation, or do you think it's more punitive?
Oof. It's hard to say. Okay, plainly, parole, probation, in addition to a term of incarceration, is punitive, right? It is additional restrictions. You walk out of prison and you still have restrictions. Although you've paid for your crime, you continue, quote unquote, to be punished with that oversight. The only time that it is not punitive is when it's used as an alternative. If you're going to place a person on probation instead of sending them to prison, then yes, then it's a good alternative. I would love to see more people on the kind of supervision they're offering now that's supportive. I would love to see that and help people avoid prison altogether. But it should not be an addition to. So
yeah, they got to do it the way that Janelle's doing it. She's got to come on the show.
Yes, we'd love to have Janelle on here. She's absolutely amazing. Tell us more about what's happening there. It's been another incredible episode of Gritability, the power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I'm your host, Adam Clausen.
And I'm Ro Clausen, and don't forget to tune in next week with our live episode of Adam down the street from where he was arrested for a 213-year sentence with a film crew. I'll be in the studio. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you then.
We'll see you next week.